This is the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 148. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 148 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope you're all doing really well out there. My name is Nick Manella. I'm the creator and host of the show, and what we try to do is give you a short and concise jazz lesson every week, give you something to work on, and get your practicing off on the right foot. Thank you so much for joining us again. If you're a new listener, welcome in. We just wanted to remind you that you can grab all of the PDFs to every single episode of this podcast that we've ever done by heading over to our Patreon page. You can find that on our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com. Follow one of the Patreon links and sign up to become a supporter for only $3 a month. You get access to all the PDFs and a lot of other extras that we do. And we really appreciate everybody that has chosen to support this podcast. I want to give a big shout out to everybody who's joined us this week. Thank you to Glenn, Brett, Joseph, Brian, and Tim. Thank you guys so much for choosing to support us with your hard-earned money. You know, digital media is kind of a tough business these days because we all expect to get our digital media for free. So those $3 donations, they really help us to pay for all the expenses that go along with producing this podcast. And it allows me to spend a lot more time preparing these episodes for you. So if you're somebody who wants to make sure that these episodes stay high quality and that I can put a bunch of time in to help you become a better musician, then head over to that Patreon page today and pledge your $3 a month, and that keeps everything rolling over here. Thank you to everybody. We've got just about 200 people over there helping to support us. And if everybody that listened to the show chose to support us with that $3 a month, of course, if it's in your budget, then we'd be able to do so much more with this show. So think about it. If you've got the $3 a month, we'd really appreciate your support. Okay, let's get into today's episode. So this week we are continuing our series on chord extensions, and we're going to take a look at two forms of the dominant seventh chord this week. And then next week, we're also going to take a look at two different forms of the dominant chord and talk about the chord extensions that are associated with them. So let's start with just a pure dominant seventh chord. So something like C7. So the cool thing about a dominant seventh chord is it actually has the same chord extensions as a major seventh chord. All we have to do is change the seventh. Obviously, we go from a major seventh to a flatted seventh, but we keep the extensions of 9, sharp 11, and 13. Those stay exactly the same. Now, of course, those extensions are going to sound a little bit different over a dominant seventh chord as opposed to a major seventh chord, but you can still think about all those things that we talked about when we were doing our episode 1 of chord extensions. It still is, again, with C7 as an example, it still is a D major triad sitting on top of that C7 chord that we're looking at. So the 9th and the 13th are both diatonic, meaning that they are both in the scale that's associated with C7. But that sharp 11 is really our tension note, right? It's the only non-diatonic note that we have in a C7 chord. And you'll notice that the sharp 11 is a very important tension over a major seventh chord as well as a dominant seventh chord. So that should clue you into something. The sharp 11 is a really important sound in jazz, and it's something that we should be able to identify over any chord that is associated with a sharp 11. So let me play a C7 chord, and then I'm going to play 1, 3, 5, 7, and then I'm going to play up those extensions 9, sharp 11, 13. And this is over a C7 chord, and let me go over the notes before I actually play them. So the actual members of the seventh chord are C, E, G, and B flat. And then the extension would be D, F sharp, and A. So that forms that D major triad that sits over the top of the chord. And I've got this written out for you in all 12 keys on the PDF so that you can go through and you can start to learn this stuff in all keys and hear what it sounds like. And that's the really important part, is actually hearing it. And then I want you to stop looking at the sheet and memorize all this stuff. But at least to get started, so you can hear what they all sound like, use the PDF that I've given you. All right, here's what it sounds like over C7. Okay, so you can hear that it sounds different. That D major triad sounds different when it's sitting over a dominant 7th chord as opposed to a major 7th chord. Let's check this out. I'm going to play the same extensions, the same exercise over a major 7th chord, and then I'm going to play it over a dominant 7th chord. And I just want you to hear how the notes interact a little bit differently depending on that flat 7 versus the major 7. So first I'll play the major 7 with these extensions, then I'll play the dominant 7 with these extensions. Listen to the difference. You can hear how those notes actually interact with the structure below them with my left hand is very, very different. So you just want to get your ear wrapped around that sound. That's super important. Okay, let's go on to the second exercise. So now we're going to talk about a dominant 7th chord with a flat 9, which, if you've listened to episodes in the past, you know is associated with something I like to call diminished dominant. So we use a half-whole diminished scale when we see this chord, and we get some really, really interesting extensions from that scale. So let's talk about what they are. So we still go up the same notes in the actual 7th chord arpeggio, 1, 3, 5, 7. But then our extensions become a lot more complicated at this point because there's just much more to think about. So we have both types of 9 in this particular chord. We have a flat 9 and we have a sharp 9, and these result from that whole half scale. So we want to use both of those types of 9s. Now, we still have the presence of a sharp 11 in that half whole scale, and we still have a natural 13 in that whole half scale. So now our extensions are going to be flat 9, sharp 11, 13. So that's 4 notes in the extension. So it starts to get a little bit more complicated. And we know from studying our half whole scale that it actually has 8 notes instead of 7 because of the presence of those 2 different kinds of 9s. So this is going to sound a heck of a lot different. Let me play this one for you over C7 flat 9 so you can hear the extensions. This one's a little bit more complicated, a little bit harder to wrap your ears around, but that's okay. You will start to get it when you work on this stuff. Here's what it sounds like. So there's just a lot more going on, a lot more to take in, a lot more attention that fits over that chord. So really studying this can be a huge benefit to you. If you can start to hear those flat 9s and sharp 9s, you're already hearing a lot of the sharp 11 and the 13 from the other stuff that we've been working on. But if you can really start to hear both of those 9ths and the differences between them, that's going to be huge for you, because then you're going to actually start to hear those sounds in your playing and you're going to want to reach for them. And that is kind of the whole crux of practicing jazz, is being able to hear those sounds and then your ear wanting you to play them and having the ability to actually do so in the course of your solos. So really study this. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to play back to back the pure dominant 7th chord with the 9, sharp 11, 13, and then I want to play after that the flat 9 with all of our different altered extensions in here. So here they are back to back. Listen to the difference between the two of them. Now, one other thing that I think might really bring this home for you is hearing a voicing with all the notes played together. So as a piano player would voice this stuff, I think hearing all the notes ringing at the same time instead of playing an extended arpeggio can really bring the sound home for you a little bit more with these different chords. So I'm going to play a pure dominant 7th chord and voice it with only the extensions in the first exercise. And then I'm going to play a C7 flat 9 voicing. And I want you to really listen to the difference between those two. This is where you're really going to hear those tensions because they're all happening at the same time. So here they are back to back, pure dominant 7 and dominant 7 flat 9. You can really hear how much more crunchy that dominant 7 flat 9 chord is when it's all played together. Okay, so you've got your homework for this week. Grab the PDFs and start working on those arpeggios until they're like second nature to you. You should be able to just play through these extensions, no problem whatsoever, and then you will be able to recall them when you're actually improvising over this stuff. It's going to take a lot of work, but it's definitely work that's worth it because this knowledge is a must-have if you want to be a better improviser and play interesting lines and not be just limited to the members of the 7th chord. Okay, so let's start a discussion in the 10-minute jazz lesson community group. Ask me any questions that you might have. That is on Facebook. Just search for the 10-minute jazz lesson community. Grab a spot in there, and we could talk about anything you want to. All right, have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next week with some brand new episodes. Remember to head over to Patreon, pledge your $3 a month, and become part of the 10-minute jazz lesson family. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.